Sissy.
For me, I think I feel very reassured that as much as gender work within our university feels like we're not doing enough, seeing other universities also doing the same work, I feel like we are reaching the towards the target that we want in terms of gender work. So definitely motivated to keep on going. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, I think, oh, there's another hand there. I was just about to.
Thank you. For me, for these 2 days, I've enjoyed listening to others and how they do their things. And, learning is a continuous process. Always learn so that you are also molded. Thank you.
We really need to keep abreast with the new developments. Okay, colleagues, I think those who are not yet in this hall will find us on the way. And I've also learned that the other colleagues are going for their flights and stuff. Okay, my name is Raisibe Mampa. I will be the program director for the day. It is indeed a reality that GBV is becoming a cancer in the institutions of higher learning. And it needs forums like this to really combat this pandemic. I think whatever we have learned throughout this week, we will go out there and put on the wheel. Okay. Without any waste of time, because we don't really have that much luxury, I'll introduce our first speaker for the day, who is an academic and a criminologist in practice, assisting the Department of Correctional Services for 27 years. Some of you were not, let me keep quiet, working with offenders, assisting with the risks and needs for rehabilitation and reoffending. She has been doing community engagement projects as a volunteer, meaning that she's plowing back to the society without any monetary expectation, but envisaging to see a rehabilitated offenders. Wow. She's also involved with the Child Care Center, profiling the risks of criminal justice system. She has published widely so, on matters regarding to crime, offending behaviors of offenders, and many more. She is an NRF researcher. Colleagues, let's welcome none but Professor A.M. Hesselink. Let's give her a round of applause.
Goodness, my glasses. Thank you and good morning. The fact that we're starting so late means that there cannot be any questions because I'm going to rush through it. I'm just joking. It's a privilege to be here and to be amongst so many experts and practitioners and academics. And thank you for this opportunity to present today. So as you know, I'm at the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice at the University of Limpopo. And let me just get this. There we go. So for those of you who do not know what we focus on as a criminologist, everything regarding crime, victims, the criminal justice system, everything related to that. Our niche area is, as criminologists, we identify and assess the causes, the motives, the contributory factors, the influences, the circumstances, anything possible that led to a person even thinking about crime, the circumstances at home, the childhood factors, up to where the person is arrested, through the correctional phase, through the court phase, the correctional phase, back into society. We're looking at the victims as well. We have a specialized subfield in criminology called victimology, where we focus on the victims. Why are they victims? What are their experiences? And how can we empower the victims and the victim rights? So in my part, for 27 years, I have been conducting volunteer criminological risks and needs assessments for the Department of Correctional Services. I have worked with, I cannot recall how many offenders in 27 years on a weekly basis, males, females, juveniles, all types of crimes, from cannibals, serial killers, serial rapists. You mention it. I've worked with them all. Currently, I'm only focusing on the most violent of all violent offenders in the country, their lifers. And the reason for that is for pre-parole purposes, for risk of reoffending. And so why offenders? Why did I choose to work with offenders? I used to work with victims. I started off working my volunteer services with victims. And then it triggered me, why are people doing what they are doing? And that is so 100% in my field as well. Of course, we are an interdisciplinary field. We are adjacent to psychology, to social work, to psychiatry, to economics, even to politics for that matter. So we are an interdisciplinary science stemming from sociology years ago. So yes, why offenders? Because whether people like it or not, and whether they want to hear it or not, the offenders are from society, and many of them are returning back to society. And the prison population is a direct link to what is going on in society. What is the moral fiber of our society? If you look at our high crime rate and the overcrowding in prisons, why are they there? Where do they come from? How did they end up there? They all come from society. They didn't fall out from thin air into prison. So yes, my risk assessments, I focus on the risks for very unmanageable, very difficult, very high profile type of offenders. I work a lot with gangs and gang leaders, serial offenders, chronic offenders, and the purpose is to identify the risk for reoffending. Because we're all humans, this is not an exact science, so I can only highlight the risks where I go through the path from the day the offender was born until the day the offender sits in front of me. And I trace that entire trajectory from that and look at childhood adverse circumstances and any factors that may have played a role in shaping this person into an offender. I also do needs assessment, and the needs would be for individual therapy purposes and or for rehabilitation purposes. I don't do the therapy. Criminologists aren't therapists. We just identify and assess and do research. So then the criteria that I have identified will be passed on for therapy purposes or for program development and so forth. And then, of course, lately, for pre-parole reports for the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services NCCS committee, specifically for the lifers, which are a big concern because the majority of the lifers committed very, very serious violent and aggressive crimes and pose a risk for reoffending. Sorry, so my focus is a holistic one and a holistic overview of just I have highlighted now. It's qualitative research. I mostly do qualitative research. I have published quantitative research as well. But of course, I work with case studies. And so For the purpose of this presentation, it's a phenomenological study, which means it's an in-depth study looking at their real worlds, at their narratives, at their lived experiences to their as part of their offending pathway. I was very ambitious. I want in the beginning to include 10 case studies. And as we went along, I realized I'm never going to be able to present 10 case studies. So I ended up with 3. And we are also stuck for time, so will suffice for now. Of course, it's one-on-one interviews with offenders. Yes, I sit in front of them just like you would sit next to one another there. They're not changed unless they are so mad at that stage that they want to harm me. But otherwise, it's a very informal discussion that we have. They have to, in general, they have to consent to work with me because they have their rights as well, even though they are offenders. All my research, the cases I'm presenting today dates to 2004 and 2005, but I have ethical approval to publish my work from the institutions and from the Department of Correctional Services. So my small sample, the first case study there, is a 42-year-old black Zulu male, incarcerated for currently incarcerated for armed robbery and 1 murder, and he received a 20-year sentence effectively. Then the second one is a 48-year-old white male, 2 murders, attempted murder, assault, and being in possession of drugs. A 40-year sentence he received. And then a 37-year-old colored male, 6 murders, 7 attempted murders, 2 armed robberies, and 10 assault GBV. And his sentence is what it states there, 127 years. So let's start off with the first one. He says he's a reborn Christian. He's divorced. He's got 2 wives and 2 sons from the 2 wives. His highest education is grade 10. He's got no skills and he was not interested in any of the skills offered in any of in the prisons that he were held. And no practical or formal training he underwent in prison. He did not further his education in prison. He's not interested. And he also does not have the intellectual capability to further his, he is intellectually impaired, as stated on his file. He went to a special needs school also. He only had, sorry, it's not him, it's the second one. Sorry, I'm a bit confused. This one is there for a purpose. He's a gangster, he's a life of gangsterism and crime, and there's a reason for that. But he had no interest in furthering himself, acquiring any skills, because he wants to be in the gang and he's going to remain in the gang. His criminal history starts off from a very young age with vehicle thefts, burglary, robbery, armed robbery, aggravated assault, firearms offences, assault to staff and inmates in prison, and also a history of violence, which he said I must please add to his list of criminal history. His father, he was a laborer, he passed away, he had 3 wives, and he said, and it's important to give you this, to give you the picture of what shaped him into an offender. He said he loved his second wife the most. She bewitched us, it's the offender, his eldest brother who stabbed his mother to death, his sister, and his brother who died, according to him, as a result of her witchcraft, and the father and his mother as well. His mother was a teacher, and she passed away because her eldest son stabbed her. He said they were 10 children altogether from the 3 wives. There were three of them at the same mother and father. And he said it was not nice to be so many children because life was so complicated. We had to compete for everything, attention, love, and affection. He had a complete absent and non-existing father-son bond. He said, my father was a good provider. There was never a shortage of anything. We only had contact with him when he disciplined us. He loved his second wife more than what he loved my mother, and he spent most of his time with the second wife. He never met the third wife. The third wife he married when he was arrested and sent to prison. He had a very strong mother-son bond. He said my mother was respected in the community. She was very clever. She was a very good teacher, a Christian. She was respected in the community. They came to her for advice in the community. Her children were her priority, and I loved her too much. She was the most important person in my life. She was my everything. I would never have ended up in prison if she was still alive. I would have been someone in life. My mother's death was the most tragic moment in my life, worse than prison. I just gave up everything because she was gone. Circumstances. He said his father drank almost every day, but especially over weekends, and he smoked dagga. My eldest brother, he stabbed my mother to death, so he's also in prison, but not the same prison. He was bewitched by my father's second wife. But he also mentions that his eldest brother is mentally ill. Socioeconomic circumstances, he said his father was a good provider and all their basic needs were attended to, and because both of his parents had good jobs. Keeping in mind him being a Zulu, I always ask because I'm white and I need to learn about cultures. Whenever I work with offenders, I ask them, tell me something about your culture. How does it work in your culture? What are the roles? How did you grow up? What is important in your culture? And I have quoted his words, and I will not read it out. I'll just touch here and there, so I hope you can read some of it. From early childhood, boys are taught to be warriors, and to be aggressive, and that's very important for manhood in the Zulu culture spoken to. And he said women in the Zulu culture are traditionally housekeepers. They maintain the household. They should listen to their husbands, and because they are the man's property. A good husband must discipline his wife and his children to maintain order in his house and in order not to diminish his respect in the community. If a husband dies, one of the remaining then one of the remaining brothers or close cousins will then marry the widow and look after the widow and the family. Regarding his own abuse, he said my father and also hit him, which happened to all of them in the household when the domestic violence occurred. He said, I only wanted to protect my mother, but he hit me so badly. I was so small and I had no power against him. I struggled to walk the next day, and the children at school teased me about how bruised and swollen I was, and also when he punished me. She told me she's okay, but I could see she's not well. I did not know how to help her, and since her death, she was alive. I enjoyed school and loved general subject or a grade. I was never expelled from classes, always did my homework, and I was serious and crime, gangs and drugs. I did it to get away from home, away from my father and my stepmother, and I just wanted to forget about them and the heartache of my mother. Then his own, I call it offender-specific factors, his own associations after he left school, his own substance abuse, and his history of violent and aggressive behavior. He said, after my mother died, I remember them all. After this, I moved to a more serious gang where we traded in drugs, did hijackings, shootings, fights, and I climbed the gang ranks. I stabbed and shot a couple of guys from another gang also. And he also said with the hijackings, according to him, he never knew, and he never knew if they died or not. And he didn't follow the media. In prison, he was a 26 gang leader. He has a severe history of alcohol, dagga, and man drugs use. Then his entire history of violence with a shootout with the police that he had gunshot wounds. His perspective on intimate partner violence, he said, yes, I hit my 2 wives and my girlfriends. It's just what I did then and what happened. I felt they wanted my money and all the luxuries because he gained a lot of money from these criminal activities. So I gave them jewelry, clothes, shoes, handbags. They went to hair salons often. You know the lifestyle then. Then they must listen to me and they must know their place. I know now it was wrong and I cannot undo it. I grew up understanding that a man is in control of his woman. It was wrong and it was bad for me to do it. The second case is a Satanist, as a white female. And according to the one correctional official said to me, at night he used to practice rituals in his cell, and so much so that other offenders refused to share a cell with him because they were very scared of him. So what they did is they placed him in a communal cell for peer pressure, and so that he does not have the space and the power to conduct these rituals, and he just stopped with it. He's never married, and he has one daughter. And he said, I don't know her proper age. I never saw her. It's a long time ago. I do not know where they are and if they are still alive. They is the mother of the child and the child. He attended a special needs school, so this is the one I referred to previously, for intellectually impaired learners, and there he did arts and crafts at that school. He said, I like wood crafting. I am very good at it. Many people told me this, and the teachers. He has a severe criminal history of assault, robbery, and possession of drugs and theft. Family substance abuse. He said, my father drank brandy every day. He was full of brandy every night, laughing about it. My mother drank brandy with him. He's alive. And then she would beg for money, for food. And she could not work because she slept a lot. That is what he said, why she couldn't work, because of the pills, obviously. He said the children at school teased us because we received old clothes and shoes, and the teachers asked for parents to pack lunch for us. If we had lunch at school, we could not get food at night. Then my father used the day's money for brandy and for my mother's pills, for more pills and for more brandy. And I tried to tell my sisters not to say that we had lunch at school so that we can get supper at night, but they were too little to understand, and they were scared of the father. He said my father was bad. He would beat my mother. We, the children, had nowhere to hide. Sometimes they would go and hide in the garden, and other times they would go to a park which was a block away from the house. And that's at night. 3 small kids, the risks. So the people of the house would intervene, and they would stop him and call the police. But they got tired of this, and they asked us to leave. My mother said my father hit me a lot on the head, and that's why I struggled at school. And he also hit me with his fists as a small child. Because he said, if I want to talk like a man, in pleading him not to hit my mother, then I must take it like a man. He also made big problems. He sexually abused his older sister, his sister just younger than him, and he said the sister only revealed this when he was arrested. His school-going years was also very difficult. He said, I struggled at school. It was difficult for me. The children teased me and called me stupid and a retard. I was moved in grade 1, which was a mainstream school, to a special needs school, where I worked more with my hands. But then, when they lost the room, they were removed by social welfare to a child. The children were removed to a childcare center. And he said some of the children at the child center also called me names, like dummy and slowbo. This made me very angry, and I would bite, hit, and stab them. I did anything just to get back at them. And then I was moved because of all the fights and all of the trouble that he caused in the center and how uncontrollable he was. They moved him to, he says, a special boys center. I presume it was a special boys school. He cannot remember the name of it. And he said there the abuse just continued. There were daily fights, and he was too scared to sleep, and he was always hungry. Next one. There. Okay. So his criminal associations, he joined a gang. He ran away from the center, and he got hikes, the old days when we hiked with trucks to Durban. There he met this 16-year-old girl that find people who wants to buy drugs on the streets. So he had to engage with, smaller children or, people wandering around, say, hey, do you want to buy some drugs, or do you want to try this for the gang? And he was also involved in many physical fights as a lookout. His role was a lookout. Also an extensive history of alcohol, man drugs, and dagga and heroin use. His violent and aggressive history, physical fights, biting, stabbing, kicking, community and prison gang involvement, and prison fights subsequently, and robberies also as indicated in his index crime. His perspective on intimate partner violence, he says, I really don't know. I hit my first girlfriend because she was flirting with other men, sorry. I think that's why she left me. Then the other girls, we had many fights, and some of them hit me first. It's like they wanted me to hit them. They wanted to fight. The third case is a colored male, and he was born in a life of gangsterism. He was from Ballar in the Cape, and his father was a gang leader, his uncles were in the gang, his mother, his sisters, his brothers. It's a life of gang. And he was forced to see me, and at first he did not really want to speak to me, and he was very hostile because he stabbed the correctional officials and he stabbed other prison members. Even though he's very high up as a 27, he's a general in prison. And from what I've heard from the other gang leaders, he's the 27 general in the country. He has no interest in getting out of prison ever, not that he will get out of prison ever, because the reality is, even we want to acknowledge it or not, many offenders carry on their lives of crime within prison because they have the world's opportunities and connections to do so. And when I asked him about his religion, he said, no, I do not believe in anyone or anything. I live my life from day to day. I am responsible for my life. And then I exactly knew with whom and what I'm working with. So then you know what to expect if you work with someone like that, and you sit with a file this big with just incidents where he was involved in. He never married, but he has 3 children from 3 different girlfriends. He has qualification as grade 9. He said, my father is a gangster, my brothers and my uncles are gangsters. I was born into a gang. That is my life. We assaulted, robbed, and killed people. Our pattern in life is the way of killing. They're taking blood. He said taking blood. That's the way of killing. Yeah. He said, everyone in my family used drugs. My father, my mother, my sisters, my brothers, we make money from drugs. My girlfriends were part of the gang and they did drugs with me. Even before me, they used drugs. His father was in prison for 8 years. My brother is currently in prison for attempted murder. We live in Ballar. We have a big house, good security with cameras, 4 to 5 security guards per shift. We have money. It's in the gang. When I asked him about his childhood abuse and trauma, he was not very talkative, but he did mention there was domestic violence in our house. He said there was a lot of domestic violence. And this is how we grew up. My mother never complained. She knew what the life of the gang is. My father is the head of the house and the leader of a gang. If we did not listen, he would hit us with a belt, or if he was very mad, he would hit us with his fists. His school experiences, he said, I did not go far at school because I was hitting the streets with the gang. I was not interested in the school. None of us have a matric, but we have money, we have power, and anything else you can think of. His criminal associations, of course, he was born into the gang, lifelong history of crime and gangsterism, and a 27 general currently. Lifelong history of substance abuse. I could not ascertain at what age he commenced with it, but you can imagine he grew up with the drugs in the house, with his parents and brothers and uncles, and you can just imagine that lifestyle. And then what do you expect is going to turn out there? I have tried and used all types of drugs, you name it. He did not want to say what else. He just said, you name it, everything. He murdered a police official and other gang members outside, and then he also stabbed a police official outside and inside the correctional centers where he's been. He's been transferred from prison to prison to prison depending on his behavior. He was at Imbongweni, Kokstad, which is a super maximum. He was at CMAX, he was everywhere because of his behavior. And he cannot understand why they keep on moving him away from his family, because his behavior escalates and he doesn't improve. So his family is far away, and then he complains, but he cannot see his family, but they visit him whenever he has a visit. The family comes to visit him. So I presume they fly in or they drive in or whatever they do. Oh my goodness, how did I do that? Sorry. His perspective on intimate partner violence, he said, I controlled my girlfriends. They must know their position in the gang. They fight with other girls over us, and they chirp at us. So they must obey us and know where they stand in the gang. Otherwise, we punish them. Then all three participants, all three cases, the contact with the family. The first guy, the Zulu guy, said, I have no contact with my wives or my girlfriends and the children. My step-brother visits me once or twice a year, and he gives me money for extra food and toiletries at the tuck shop. My aunt, my mother's one sister, she used to visit me, but she passed away a year ago. This was in 2004. The second one, the white guy, he said, no, it's been years. I have not seen or heard from them. He's the girlfriend, the mother of his daughter, or the daughter. I do not know where they are and whether they are alive. And he receives no visits, no family, no nothing. Nobody visits him in prison for that 40 years. And then the third one, the 27 general that was born in the gangs, he said, my children come to visit me and my family, my parents and other siblings. So, I mean, he said to me, we've got money, you know, wanted me to know they've got money. He's not a nobody. They've got money and they've got power, and they are very powerful. Anyone will tell you in the community gangs are very powerful, whether we like it or not. That is part of our community. They're part of society. So, in essence, what I do with the adult offenders, I trace their trajectories to identify risks for reoffending. In this case, like if you have a history of violent and aggressive behavior, the multiple crimes you've committed, if you've been in prison before, you've got no meaningful, significant bonds with other people or with non-criminal people, you still have criminal associations. Yes, in prison, you are in prison, but you still conduct criminal activities while in prison, still violent and aggressive behavior in prison. Of course, you're a very high risk for when you go out. So the link is always very clear with childhood, adverse childhood experiences, with childhood abuse and the various forms thereof, exposure to violence from a very young age, and specifically exposure to domestic violence. As you know, research has proven that there is a link between children that grow up in domestic violence with domestic violence in the homes, and some, not everyone, some of the boys repeating the same behavior as adults. Family aggression plays a role, dysfunctional households plays a role, poor parent-child bonds, it's so important. I always say it takes, no matter what the circumstances, it takes one emotionally stable, involved, non-criminal, non-aggressive, non-violent adult or meaningful person in a child's life to pull that child through. It only takes one person to give that recognition, that acknowledgement to that child. That can make a difference in a child, irrespective of the circumstances. Just one. Only one. It does not need to be a parent. It's amazing if it's a parent. It does not need to be a parent. But it must be consistent, and the involvement must be there. The consistency is very important for that. Lack of parental involvement, poor or lack of parental supervision and monitoring in the children's lives, parental criminality, many research articles prove a direct link between male imprisonment and parental criminality, specifically with the fathers. Low parental education, family trauma, socioeconomic deprivation, communities, living in communities where there's high rates of violence, with limited education and economic opportunities and high unemployment rates, few community activities for young people, inadequate community facilities, other traumatic experiences such as bullying at school, discrimination, racism, overcrowded households, food insecurity, poverty, and intergenerational poverty. These are just a few that I've mentioned here that play a prominent role in shaping people into offending behavior. and that has a link to violent, aggressive, antisocial, delinquent and criminal behavior, and even in reoffending behavior. So that has been me providing you a bird's eye view of the offender and why people sometimes do what they do. You do not just wake up and decide today you're going to rape 5 women. There is always a history and causes and contributory factors to the behavior. And with many of the offenders, I always ask about domestic violence. And many of them, some of them just look off and say, no, no, never. And then you, of course, know it happened. And then no matter how you try to probe, and I've been doing this for 27 years, I think I know how to probe and to interview, they refuse to say anything about it. Correctional Services does offer a gender-based violence program. I can confirm that. But the past 2 years, the offenders I've seen, I asked them about, what programs did you attend? There's nothing about gender-based violence there, or they do not want to acknowledge it, but there's nothing on file also. So remember, the programs are voluntarily, so they must volunteer to, even though it's prescribed for them, they do not have to attend it if they don't want to. So it's still a major problem in prison. Maybe we should start focusing on prison also with intimate partner violence and with gender-based violence. Maybe we should start projects there too. We do have transgender offenders also in prison. Their knowledge and their understanding of why they commit crimes, of why they have no respect for women, of why they are violent towards women. Not all of them have the necessary insight and understanding. And very often only when you trace the causes and the contributory factors and you link it to their behavior and you explain their path to them, how they like, I never thought about it like that. And so we really need more work with offenders, and for prevention purposes, we need to start with the small children. We need teachers that are informed about what to look out for children with difficult circumstances, that it's not okay to abuse women in any form or abuse women to abuse men in any form. So we still need a lot of education on gender-based violence, and specifically domestic violence, intimate partner violence, as I think the majority of the male, adult, violent and aggressive offender population have a history of domestic violence as children, and them themselves repeating the same behavior that they endured as children, just replaying the same scenario again as adults. Thank you. That's my last.
Thank you so much, Prof, for opening our eyes on the issue of offender perspectives and criminology. I personally thought the offenders should be banished from our society. I was so quick to judge and crucify them. Little did I know that I think we all saw the aces there. I give you time and opportunity to engage Prof. Annelie. Let me remind you, our reporters for the past 2 days, they were UJVUT. Please give Ms. Tapelo and they too, Unizulu, UFS and Fort Hare. If you give Tapelo the report. And for today, our reporters are Walter Sisulu University and Sol Plaatje. Tapelo, you wanted to say something? Okay, let's pack it for now. Anyone who would like to engage our professor? Francina, the roving mic. Oh, how many hands are? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No more hands. I'll accord you time and space. Go on.
Thank you, Chair. Prof, thank you for an insightful presentation, and I want to come to higher education and the profile of perpetrators that we're dealing with. That's very evasive. They're not located in prison that we can do profiles, because I think higher education institutions is very good at recycling, not in a good way. They're recycling offenders from one university to the other university, and they never get through their own denials. What would you suggest can we do? Because this is an especially offenders with power, and we know that power are linked to offending. And if you have power, you have the power to offend. And you also have more power over victims. You see it with child sexual abuse and the types of offenders. And when they first get caught, it's around 35, and then in their 50s. At that time, they already offended 500 plus children. And I think the statistics in our education is the same, that they offend until they get caught. And because they have power, they never get caught. And if they do get caught, it's hush-hush. What would you suggest we do to really take the focus off in support of victims, but really go to the crux of the problem, and it's offending? And we don't live in this denial and have this good victim programs, but the offenders continue to have high positions, continue with academic careers, continue to get their doctorates and their professorships while offending. So that will be my point. I'm very passionate about this.
Thank you. I just want to, do I understand you correctly? You are talking about the offenders reoffending. Is that what you are talking about? Okay. So, unfortunately, in our country, we have, due to the criminal justice system, once they, unless it's specified in the sentencing that no parole ever, lifelong, you will die in prison, that type of thing, once they reach, if they are role model prisoners, now I haven't presented role model prisoners, but many pedophiles are, if they do not reoffend in prison and get themselves into a position where they enroll for education and get access to a laptop and internet that is not supervised, and the officials don't even have the capability to supervise them or to know what to look for, what they are busy with, they reoffend. I've worked with about 14 pedophiles. We all know power and control with all of the violence offences play a lot of, plays a prominent role. Simply put, we need from all types of the educational sector, we need research from different angles. And we need more pressure, because look at our prisons, they are so overcrowded at the moment. And the violent crimes are in the increase, we know that. But it's also a direct link to the community we live in. It is a community problem. It's not just a prison or a criminal justice problem. We need more community involvement as well. We need to start curbing and addressing it at the community level, because that's where many of them are created. So yes, the research and the forums for offenders, we really need that, because it's far and a few people that want to work with offenders. But to me, I have never learned so much and understand so much why people do what they do since I've worked with offenders. By no means an excuse whatsoever. But if you look at the intellectually impaired person, you have some sort of expectations for this person in his life. If you look at a person who's born into a gang and who's only interested in gang and drugs, and who pride themselves in drugs and taking power and control of other people, you know what their pathway is going to be. You're not going to change that pathway. They want to be there now because it's lucrative, they make a lot of money, they are in power, they are in control, they have the esteem that we get if we get titles and degrees. They have it in just in another deviant way. So interdisciplinary efforts, I would say, and research regarding offenders. I don't even know if I've answered you.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Prof, for the presentation of the case studies. Very interesting, I must say. And what I want to say is that from the presentation, I have learned that they all have history of being abused as children. They come from violent families, abusive families. And also it's something that maybe we as a nation or a society should look into, to say that we have to nip it in the bud, because the upbringing is the one that brought all these other behaviors. We can't blame the government and the ANC for this one. We have to, as parents, maybe make sure, I don't know, maybe are there platforms where we can say these kids, parents, maybe should be put in the platform there, like in the limelight there, to say, what is it that you are doing for these kids, and maybe some programs that can help in order to cut these things short. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to comment on that, again, it goes back to the community. We must start at the community. There must be community initiatives involving parents, and even, more so parents from very poor socioeconomic circumstances. If you see a woman bruised, a mother bruised, then you know what's happening in that house. That house must be targeted. That's where community leaders must come in. Community workers must come in for programs. But I must also just reiterate that not all offenders have histories of abuse. If you look at many of the economic offenders, not all of them, some of them even have abusive backgrounds. But the severity of the abuse differs. But for each and every person sitting there, that's their reality, and that's what they could not cope with. But there's always a reason why they do what they do, and in the majority of cases, it's severe abuse and neglect. And if they only had nurturing, caring, loving, stable family environments, the turnout would have been different. And guidance. Parental guidance. Often the parents themselves are too young. They're also on drugs. So yes, they are not capable parents then.
Thank you, Prof. The next question, keep it short.
Okay, thank you, Prof, for the beautiful presentation. It was very insightful. I've also had an opportunity to work at a correctional facility. I used to do risk assessments as well with offenders, with lifers, the serial killers. And one of the other aspects that these offenders will tell you why they re-offend, besides the psychological unresolved issues, they will say it's failure for the communities to accept them in the society. They lack proper reintegration into their communities. So I was here thinking and asking myself, what can we do as a society? How can we mobilize that as society? They are aware that these are people that are part of us, they are part of our society. Should we include the indunas or the traditional heads, so that these people are reintegrated back to the society? Because when they are not reintegrated successfully, then now they say they feel rejected, and at the end of the day, to protect themselves, then they start violence, then they start murdering again. So how can we best do it as societies? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, unfortunately, once you're in prison, you are stigmatized, you are labeled. And if you're a violent and aggressive offender or a sexual offender, the community does not want you back in the community. Many of the offenders said to me they cannot go back to the community because they know they will be killed, and their parents were, abused by the community and were also stigmatized. So the incarceration of an offender does not only affect his life, it affects the family's reputation and the stigma attached to that. And of course, correctional services had at one time, they had involvement of where they had various companies that were prepared to give offenders a second chance in employment. I don't know what happened about, with that program, whether it's still going. But, there are just too many offenders for people to employ. And you can understand from the employer's side of view, you're not going to employ an economic offender or a sexual predator for that matter. So, but yes, they are stigmatized and perceived as outcasts of the community. And I think if they are accepted back, that they've paid their dues, if they have not recommitted crimes again, then they should be given that chance to be reintegrated into the community and be accepted again.
Thank you so much, Prof. I think you are all answered. One but last question.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. You've presented on something that I really like. I'm concerned about the role of childhood trauma in all these offenders, and I'm just wondering if there has ever been a point where most of these offenders would say, I've come to overcome the trauma, and if by the time they get to be integrated back into the communities, do they feel that they have at least managed to process that trauma? And the second comment is about what you've mentioned, which I think is very much critical in terms of the role of the educational system in helping children to become socially aware, to become self-aware. Because I think one of the key factors here is how as children we get to learn about how to process our emotions. And I'm seeing the different multiple levels of traumas in all the 3 cases that you have presented. And I'm just wondering, is there ever a point where these offenders feel like they have now come to deal with their childhood traumas? Thank you.
I can't remember the first part now again, but to talk about the childhood abuse, many of them, it depends on the insight and the understanding and the ability of the offender. And it depends on the severity of the trauma. We do have excellent psychologists in prison which do offer psychotherapy, but the caseloads are so hectic that they work mostly with referrals and if there is really a need. So not each and every offender gets to see the psychologist unless it's specified for their reports, like the violent offenders. And even, then they address the abuse and the childhood factors, but still, I think there are so much hurt and so much damage already. And then, with a lifelong substance abuse, the insight and the understanding and being accepted back in the community plays a role. And with the children, that is, for me, that's the only place where we can start, is with the young children, saying to them, you do not have to be like your father or your mother. You do not have to end up using drugs. You do not have to stay in these circumstances. But how is that child going to accomplish that if that child does not have non-criminal, substance abuse supporters or, caretakers? That's the problem. So it's a very complex problem, but I mean, we're such a resilient society. Why can't we address this? Why can't we reduce our violent and aggressive men and women in society? Why can't we address the abuse? Thank you very much, everyone.
The last question.
Thank you very much. Let me just go straight. After you had interviews with these offenders, did they show remorse of what they did, or what is their a state of mind? Do you see something changing them? The second one is because they are in correctional services. These correctional services, do they receive a correction, or they are just going to be repeat offenders in there? Instead, they are getting more education of doing further, or continue with what they did before, or making sure that they do it best now? Is it assisting for them to be in correctional services, or is even worse, better when they are outside these services?
Thank you. Not all offenders are mad and bad. There are many success stories. There are many offenders that really change their lives and never commit crime again, and they plow back into the community once they're out. And yes, there are those that just cannot do it. These 3 offenders, no, they did not show remorse. Very often, offenders do not show remorse. Denial stays a big problem. You know, like, no, I'm not, the majority that you see haven't done the crime. And then I say, but I hear you, but I have to work what's on file. You are here in prison, so that's why I'm seeing you. So now let's talk around it, and then I go the childhood way. So regarding the correction in correctional services, there are many programs, there are many efforts. Shortage of resources, staff, budget plays a big role. But we do have many success in rehabilitation, but not as many as we would like to with the repeat offenders. Once you repeat chronic life course offender, that addiction to the power and the control and the crime and the quick fix to make money, like for instance cash and transit robbers. When you work with a cash and transit robber, you know they're very well connected. They're in the country well connected. They know who's who in the country, doesn't matter. Inter-province doesn't matter. And I've worked with how many cash and transit robbers, they get out, they reoffend. They are role model prisoners. They assist with schooling. Most of them are highly intellectual. Got matric, some of them even have degrees. But how do you replace that quick fix to the money? And if you have a history of drugs are so available in the community, even more so, you know, maybe where they are, but it's so available. Alcohol problems, it's socially acceptable. Those are the obstacles, and then the criminal associations. If they can cut with the criminal associations and decide to walk a straight path, yes, but the criminal associations in cases like crime syndicates can approach them again. And it comes with a cost. Once you're in a syndicate, you hardly get out, you know. Once you're in a gang, you never get out. So they keep on reoffending. But not everyone in terms of crime in prison. Depends on the crime, it depends on the history, it depends on many factors. But I always would like to hope for that one person where the light goes on and I'm never going to do this again. And it has happened many times, yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Timekeepers, we are 30 minutes behind our schedule. And I realize that people still want to engage Prof. How far are we safe to give them space and time? Timekeepers? You want to say something, Dukes? Prof, are you still available?
Thank you. Good morning, colleagues. Mine is a comment. the departments used to have programs like ex-offender reintegration. Ne? Those projects were funded to run those programs so that to avoid the recidivism. But now, due to lack of resources, budget cuts and everything, I no longer hear about them. There are also parenting skills that were run by the projects so that we can know how to handle our children, because most of the time we don't have time for them. We focus mainly on the material things without actually showing the love and affection for them, and they look for love elsewhere. So I think I'm not sure how to manage these ones, because it's the budget cuts that are mainly making things difficult to prevent these things, because now we are reactive most of the time, and I don't think that is really helping. Thank you.
It was just a comment. Thank you.
So what role, you've mentioned the role that basic education can play. What role can we play at a higher education level where now most of them have actually, in some instances, left those environments that were not so conducive for them having healthier and non-violent interpersonal interactions with other people? So what role can we at a higher education institution level do? Because I think if we are focusing on young men, a lot, even in this space, is focused on young women. And a lot of our interactions with young men is to affirm that they are violent, is to affirm that they are trash, it's to affirm that indeed they are. I mean, I think there's the kind of words being used are stigmatizing and are really declaring a state of hopelessness in the young men who come into higher education spaces. So what really is there for us to do that maybe reorientates, I don't want to say necessarily rehabilitates per se, but what is there for us to do in this space, and what are some of the considerations that we could probably look at implementing as programs or interventions to play our role?
Thank you. I think a big problem is skills development for many of the offenders, especially, unemployment, and then from the educational part, also from the emotional sphere of the individual. I think that, again, tracing back to the children at school, we need programs at school from grade 1 or from grade RR. What is not acceptable? And to reiterate to the child, you do not have to turn out like that. Speak out if this happens at your house so we can intervene. But where do you place that child? Because if you send everyone to child and youth care centers with such dire childhood circumstances, often they are worse off in the child and youth care centers because they're already so damaged and so much abuse have been endured. But regarding the offenders back in the community, the stigmatization plays a big role, specifically with violent offenders and those who served long terms in prison. And very often if they served long terms in prison, it's very difficult for them to go back to the community because they are used to small spaces, they are used to only certain colors, they are used to only certain food. The adjustment is huge, let alone to be accepted by the community, to find employment, to find friends in the community again. So the programs from higher education must be an integrated one, working, I think, already with correctional services while they're still in prison, and from there on, well before they go out, to look at the circumstances so you don't send them back to the same circumstances if they lived in poverty, if they did not have skills, because it's, even though they try to recommend to each and every offender to empower themselves to self-development, not all of them do it, even though the opportunities are there. And not all offenders have the means for further education also, the financial means also. So yes, it plays a big role in employment, it plays a big role in your sense of belonging in community. I really think in consultation with the correctional services and with the experts, therapists within correctional services, a program can be, you can do a lot from the educational side for offenders not reoffending, depending on the angle you come from and what you incorporate in that program to address the acceptance of the community and the reoffending risks. On the preventative side of them reoffending. Children.
Looking at the adverse childhood experiences,
Yeah.
for example, and the circumstances that are at a domestic level, what then is possible for us in higher education from a preventative point of view?
Okay, I got you.
Because I think it also links with what the question
Yeah.
is saying. Because one of the things that we've noted in previous COP meetings is that there are people who are in academia, but evading accountability. So yes, there are those who are coming in, young men, and if you keep me saying young men at the program, I think that we really then are going to be mandated equally to deal with young men and engage them in a preventative way rather than a stigmatizing way as offenders, whether we know or not that they're offending, which I think is quite problematic, but another conversation. But how do we then preventatively engage with young men who come into the higher education space, who then, through their degrees, may actually acquire power that allows them to evade accountability from a gender point of view, from a sexual violence point of view. So they may not necessarily ever enter the correctional services system, but nonetheless they are offenders without the justice process.
Without being ever caught, correct. From my previous institution, there were many programs addressing male dominance, male violence for the for the academics, and I would think similar programs, but it must be how to get them to be involved. It's going to be a voluntarily thing, and unless it becomes a program that the institution decides that each and every male must, attend. They must attend this workshop or they must attend that. And it must be an interactive type of workshop for them, not to again just sit and start working on something else and not listening what's happening. It must be an institutional driven program to highlight whatever you want to address with the power and the control and the abuse happening within an already powerful position. Yeah. Because it exists it's within all the universities. But as you say, we've just denied it or not addressed it or just looked the other way because we don't know how to address it. And the only problem is they are not in prison. They are in society, which makes them more powerful and more access. They have more access to victims. So it must be addressed in an institutional level and make it compliant for all males. Doesn't matter who you are and where you're from, to attend it. And from there, if they still don't show insight or understanding or have denial, because many people have denial, then it will carry on. It will carry on. That's a sad thing. There is no direct answer for you. There is no direct result, necessarily. Yeah.
Thank you, Prof. Pardon me, colleagues. I hear that you're struggling to locate the restroom. Just a few steps towards the back, then you have arrived. Thank you. Can we have the last two speakers? Grab questions? Colleagues, I see 3 hands. Can I understand that you really need to engage. To the organizers, please organize a week's workshop on this burning issue. We really need to engage and learn more. But looking at the time, colleagues, I see we are way behind the schedule. Okay, thank you. There's a program within the program. Now I'm gonna take a little back seat and call upon Mr. Dukes Rasebopie to direct this other mini program within the program. Mr. Dukes, over to you, sir.
Hi everyone. Hello everyone. Good morning. Are we well? Are we good? So technically, by advocating for more questions, it's because I knew the next session was mine and probably has a lot more time than we may need to do what we realistically have to do, I think, in the strategic planning session. So we could do the additional. You said it's 3 hands.
Yes.
Then I think we have the additional 3 hands. Then Prof is officially off the clock for a Q&A engagement. No, so that's what I'm saying. Just as that last 3, then we know that we. Did you note the 3?
Yes.
It's Pierre and
the lady was here.
Angie and. But Pierre's thoughts are my thoughts, so you're captured anyway. I mean, I'll start. Okay, while Angie is at the restroom, we'll start here, then Tapel and wait for Angie to return.
Thank you, Duke. Duke and I have worked together for many years. So I guess we do share the same views. But my question was to build on, in fact, the first question, which was around what I think we would see as high functioning perpetrators. These are senior, powerful men in our institutions who serially sexual harass often younger women students. And I think what that's a combination of is power and toxic forms of masculinity, but also sometimes narcissism and a hint of psychopathy. So and I think what happens is that they're so powerful in our institutions that there isn't justice for victims, and they leave or influence hearings, and they go to another institution. Are those people rehabilitatable? Because what our institutions should do is shut the door on their power, but they don't, because they're connected or they move to another institution. Are they rehabilitatable, these people? Thank you.
Oh, this one is on. Yes, I know exactly what you're referring to, and I think we had some very powerful, the big boss at universities with allegations of sexual harassment and so forth. And most probably it's the first time that they've been caught with this, but with a long history of it. Can they be rehabilitated? It depends on the type of personality we're working with. It depends on whether there are any disorders or not, as you know. The person knows how to function. It feeds this person. He feeds on it, just like a serial killer feeds on the next kill and the serial rapist on the next rape. These powerful people feed on exactly the same. The serial offenders, they are life course serial offenders. It's just not been caught. Can they be rehabilitated? Some of them would be. They're highly intellectual. They should have the insight and understanding. But then my question comes again as a criminologist. Why are they doing it? What happened for them to be like that? And if you don't address the causes, you will never address the behavior. So it's always important to go back to what enhanced this? The need for superiority, the need for power and control. Were you so helpless as a child? What happened? Is your self-esteem so low? Is it impulsive behavior? Is it a total disrespect for women? There is so many aspects to address. I'm sure many can be, but if you look at the age when they stopped, then it's actually frightening. It's frightening to see that, yes.
Thank you, Prof. And I think it will be injustice if I don't ask you a question, because I'm the one who
You're bullying me.
invited you. Okay, my question is maybe it's similar to what Pierre has alluded on with regards to narcissists. Yesterday, the NPA spoke more on the duty to report. Now, narcissists are mostly emotional abusers and physical abusers. And the duty to report, you would find that people who are abused subject themselves to a point to say, no, I still love the person. And how best then is that a criminal offense, and how best can we curb that? Second to that, I want to ask, yes, you presented on male perspectives. I want to know more around the issues. So do you focus only on male, or are there any research that you have done around the queer offenders? And how best would institutions then see to it that such matters are addressed? Because I sometimes tell my students to say, GBV sometimes it's hereditary. Because my father did it, I took it as a norm and a practice, then I'm gonna do it to my partner. So how best can we also keep that?
Okay, you ask many
Thank
questions.
you.
Thanks. You ask many questions there. They currently and it with the same dignity and respect than all other offenders. I have seen South African research. I know of a psychologist busy with his doctorate degree on the LGB topic, addressing that in prison, where the wifeys of the gangsters were them, and the lack of power they have, and the powerlessness and the helplessness in their positions where they were put in. And just if you enter a prison and you're different from the normal male population, you are targeted. The moment you stand out, you are targeted. And his research is addressing that. But internationally, there's quite a lot of research on that at the moment. I can't remember your other questions.
No, there's just one more.
One more?
And then they're asking for the videographer if you could come respond from that end. And there's just one more from...
I don't think I've answered all your questions. We take it?
Take it offline, yeah.
Okay, offline. Thank you. Off-road, okay.
Thank you, Prof. Mine is, do you see a chance for rehabilitation possible with so much intergenerational trauma? And how do we break the cycle? Thank you.
It depends on the resilience and the opportunities for that person in life. Depends on the personality of the person. Many people can just acknowledge what happened, realize they were victims in their childhood for which they had no choice about, and park it there and carry on as survivors. Many people can do that. Just as you become a rape survivor or a domestic violence, intimate partner violence survivor, many people have that ability. It depends on the person-specific characteristics and traits and abilities. If you have that, then it's very easy to, and you have the necessary insight and understanding, and victim empathy is very important, and self-control, then we can do it. Then they can be rehabilitated. I remember the other question Sabelo asked us was about narcissism. Can it be a crime? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could list it as a crime? Wouldn't it be wonderful? You know how many people we will have in prison? We must have a prison. In the old days, in the 70s, we used to have a prison only for psychopaths. It was at Zonderwater. And it still has the hospital outlay of the psychopathic hospital, that it was hospital prison, that it was called. And there they had intensified psychiatric, psychological interventions, focusing on this population because they knew exactly with whom they are working with. Now we're sitting with a correctional system, whether you're a psychopath, whether you're a serial killer, they all together. It doesn't matter. So where does the focus lie in rehabilitation? Is it a one size fits for all? Because it clearly doesn't work. That's why I come in and I work with the individual. I determine individual specific, offender specific, offense specific risks and factors. Because you cannot have a serial rapist, a gang rapist, a person who raped children, all in the same sexual offender program. You will empower some, you will lose some, it serves no purpose. So we need to first go individualized before we can develop programs for specific groups of offenders, like we had the psychopathic hospital and prison. We need, sections where only sex offenders are. They for me should be in a separate unit, where, cash and transit robbers are in a separate unit. So you can monitor their networking, you can monitor the associations. So we need to start thinking broadly, but the correctional services does not have the capacity for that. We can never out-prison an offender population, but we need to be smart about how we work with them, to look at the specific type of groups. Let's get all the guys who rape children together and we work with them specifically and look at all the the reasons there, the trades there, and can even be used for research purposes for a better understanding, to make a difference in rehabilitation, because this one-size-fits-all, quick, put everyone through all the programs we've done from our side, everything, they've done all the programs, anger management, everything, they know it all. And some of them can't even tell you what the programs entailed, they can't even remember it. So it's neither here nor there. Some can be rehabilitated, some cannot be. It's very difficult. There's not a precise answer.
Thank you. Can we give Prof a round of applause, please? Thank you. Yeah, and I think that last bit is a good reflection point in the sense that it is very difficult. I think even in the work that we do around gender affirming, gender inclusive work, is that we wouldn't be at a point of crisis if it was easy work. So the reality of the matter is that it is difficult work. It is hard work. And one of the things that we do in academia in particular is to do a lot of talk, right? We talk about these things, and then we look forward to having a new author or journal that we can come to the conversation with and say, according to Duke 2023, we have seen that, that theory by Freud has now manifested itself in this kind of way within and then we just end up at the talk bit of things. So what we are intending to do right now in this strategic planning session is to allow for time to actually plan towards action and plan towards implementation. So we will break into groups that are focused on the subcommittee groups that presented on day one. So we've all heard aspects of plans and intentions that people want to do, what has been done before. But I think it's good, as we have reflected also this morning, to start thinking around, sure, this was great for us to hear, but what then do we want to go back and do? One, as a COP, what do we want to go back and do? What kind of programs and interventions do we want to consider doing? What kind of research do we want to consider doing as a COP? Or what kind of research would we like to spotlight beyond what has been had at this conference as well? When I think around ideas of the role of spirituality, You know, whether you think it plays a significant role or not, it's something that pretty much came up through, you know, the past couple of days. And I think it's those kind of ideas of saying, well, maybe we need to know more, maybe we need to understand more, maybe we need to have a better understanding of how spirituality plays a role in ideas of gender-based violence as well, and explore such work. And I think when we're thinking around the presentation that Prof has done, I think that has also enriched for some people the perspectives that they have when they look at someone who's an offender, to say, well, it's not necessarily just this act that we need to engage upon, it's not just this act that needs to be addressed, but to say, but what other factors need to be thought about. And really it comes back even to how we came to mention and name our community of practice, that yes, we are gender practitioners, but we know it's quite an intersectional thing. It's not just a matter of thinking around presentation and identity and expression, but there's so much. And I think just referencing also my colleague, it's a journey. It's not a one-stop shop that we are going to create. That's not what the COP is. And that's why it's, in its nature, it allows for not just one representative from an institution. And just because we say 2 representatives at a conference, it doesn't necessarily mean that the COP is limited to 2 individuals within a particular institution. Because at the end of the day, we do need as many research form for people to fill in. So we'll just correct that for now when we break into our groups. 2, I also noticed that people filled in more than one form in some instances, which is perfectly fine. So what I may ask is that you probably go with like your priority one, or like your first pick. And if your first pick is fairly full, then you could probably move to your second pick so that there's meaningful engagement in every working group. Would that be okay? We good? So right now we're going to speak about what we want to do. And more than anything, from each working group, I want 2 action points. 2 action points, 2 things that working group commits itself to do in the next 6 months. Okay, so when we meet again and we say feedback and reporting in November, over and above anything else, we want to find out, have we gone and acted towards these 2 things? One of them needs to be a webinar of sorts. Okay? So one of them needs to be a webinar. So when you're saying we are the research group, you need to tell us what webinar you are planning on doing. And part of the reason is that I think, as we have noted, it's the engagements we have, even physically, sometimes people can't reach them, including people within the community, one. So that's how we are going to get as much engagement and interaction as possible. I also think it's important that people in our institutions, our departments, where we go and ask for money to come to this conference, need to see more of us doing work in between those conferences as well. There needs to be a justification for the amount of money that is used in us coming to this conference. As much as it's good, as much as it's meaningful, as much as it is necessary and needs to continue, but there needs to be further engagement, broader engagement, even collectively beyond the conferences that we have. So please think of a webinar that we should have. I think there's about 5 or 6 working groups. So essentially it would mean that every month leading up to the November conference, colleagues would be hearing about a COP event or webinar, or even if we set it as every 2 weeks run leading up to the November conference, however we want to do it, however you discuss, you feeling that it would be the best way to go about it, but we do need 2 action points. Otherwise, we run the risk of being a talk shop and not a committee that actually goes out and implements. Or we will implement at the 11th hour knowing that we'll have to report back at a COP conference. Then that would not be meaningful work. It would not be meaningful engagement. And the one thing I would hate is for us to resort to being a box-ticking community of practitioners. So 2 things from each working group. 1 has to be a webinar. 1 has to be something that we all are able to monthly or whatever period or cycle we agree on to share with our colleagues in other institutions and grow the community. It may not grow the amount of people who come to attend the conference, but at the very least, we need to grow the amount of people who are conscientized around gender work on our campuses, so that when we do work on our campuses outside of the COP, we do have co-collaborators, we do have allies, we do have people who know about this work and can further advocate for this community to exist and thrive within our institutions. Is that okay? Any questions, inputs, and thoughts on those two? The second one is up to you. And also, you're not limited to just 2 action points. You could come back and say, we actually want to have 3 webinars, for example. And that's perfectly fine. And whichever other intervention you may want to work towards based on what the relevance is. So for example, advocacy, the second part could be making sure that the day of action that we had last year continues again to take place this year, and talk around how that could happen under the current circumstances that we are in. If you wanted to be part of the funding group, it could be an idea around how do we fundraise, or how do we ensure that we get resources together in order to enhance and expand the programs that we are already running on our individual campuses, or even how do we get to a point where we have funding to run programs that are regional, for example. When we are talking about research, it could be a matter of saying, well, we want to do or start a research project, or maybe hopefully come to a point where we have some other publication that everyone in that committee has contributed towards by maybe November, or at least having started the work now, so that in the next conference in June 2024, then there is some level of a publication. It could be something around doing an interventions manual, for example. I heard a lot of people speak about several resources, and I think if we are going to be realistic, a lot of us may not necessarily be able to read all those policies. So it may be a toolkit, for example, in terms of the kind of interventions that can be put together and shared amongst the community and other people within the university community to help people along their way, and so forth and so on. Those are the kind of engagements and interactions that we are looking at, so that in November we speak to actions and things that we have done, and we can speak to having consistently engaged as a community under the banner of the community of practice as well. Any questions before we break those into groups? Yeah. Sure.
Chairperson, I'm not sure if the people or colleagues online are accommodated, given relevance to the fact that, like for an example, advocacy, Eugene and Simon presented from their presentation, they were talking about plans that they are envisaging on having for the second semester. So I would think that maybe advocacy can take that presentation and then work around it, because they have discussed it before. I'm just saying, let's think of them when we do the breakout.
Yeah, so the people online will work differently. So the people online will work as an integrated effort, since they are all on one platform, and breakaway rooms will not just be effective. So those people online will engage on everything holistically. This is just, for example, a planning session. This is what you are planning to do. So you have colleagues, for example, who are virtually online but form part of these working groups. You have colleagues who for logistic and travel purposes are now either in a flight, on the way to an airport, or otherwise. So this is merely just a plan. So even if it happens that we are sitting here and say, these are the 2 seen programs or invitations happening, and by September would probably be like a midpoint review of what the plans that this conference has agreed on, the 2 or 3 action points, and how far we are on those ones. Any other questions, hands, inputs?
Yeah, thank you, Chairperson. I just want to raise a different issue, more so because we are in a planning session. My issue is about the governance of the COP. Colleagues, we nominated members last year to be in the steering committee. And between now and the previous conference, the chairperson resigned, Charlene. I think she tendered her resignation a day or 2 days before this conference. And Dr. Ruby Ann, I think, important the secretariat portfolio to get another person there. So then we need a mandate or a resolution from this conference to get a chairperson and the other person to assist Tapel. Because Tapel, honestly speaking, all right. So it was very much critical in terms of running our meetings, our planning meeting, and he was alone because Ruby Ann just resigned. I think Duke, could you please facilitate this process of replacing those who have resigned before we leave this conference, so that when we go to the next conference, then we have a committee.
Can allow for time for that as well. Very best to slot that in. We'll do our very best to slot that in.
Okay, thank you, Duke, for this opportunity, and thank you very much for Advocate Makema. But I know, but because others will be, traveling, starting their journey very soon, I was thinking that what about if we start with it now, before we go for the team, for the teams or for the groups, because at least most of us who are still here, but others from 11.
There was 3 allocated responsibilities, but there was the deputy chairperson, which is Ruzani. And then we have Duke, who was spearheading the student co-op and activities on the student engagement. And then we have Ruzani has nominated Duke, and Ruzani, I'm now nominating him. Vote to say who can be the chairperson, procedurally, democracy.
No, I think Tapelo, we have a nomination.
Second part, we need to fix the issue of the secretary position, and as well because Duke now is stepping as the